First of all, thank you for that kind introduction, David, and the invitation to speak to everybody today. As you can see from the title there, I was asked to speak on epistemological and methodological issues in comparative and international education. So I hope this is going to prove helpful for those of you out there. Let me just move to slide 2 and say, yeah, I'm speaking from the University of Bristol and from my home in Bristol. We thought this event was going to be in Madrid some time ago. Because of COVID pandemic, prevents us from meeting in person. I know we've got a diverse audience. I know the Global CIE Forum supports new generations of scholars in our field, and therefore I'm doing this presentation in a way that I hope meets the interests of all of those people in that mixed audience. Here are some aims for the presentation, especially in view of what I said in slide 1. These are the things that I aim to do. I want to outline the key challenges and tensions that are currently being faced by CIE, paying particular attention to, as asked, as requested, the epistemological and methodological implications. Secondly, I want to set the analysis in terms of the current trends and development in their wider historical, theoretical and cultural contexts. Thirdly, to interrogate the ways in which these challenges are being dealt with today in the light of the literature on international education policy transfer, and of course in the light of my own related research in different contexts worldwide. Finally, I will identify a number of further concerns and priorities that I think demand critical attention for anybody working in the field of CIE into the future. The contemporary challenges and tensions, well, there are lots, and this list could be huge, but I've tried to just focus upon what I've labeled here as the existential challenges too. Well, first of all, to the origins and history of our field, and that's as with many other fields and disciplines as well, and associated with the current decolonial debates and the global dominance of Western educational models and frameworks. Secondly, challenges to the concepts of international development and sustainable development, as perhaps implicated with modes of ongoing neocolonialism built into those processes or seen to be built into those processes. And thirdly, to look at the related implications for educational futures. It's a phrase used by UNESCO at the moment. Educational development cooperation, environmental uncertainty, climate change, research modalities, and terms that other people have been using today, equity, identity. Also indigenous knowledges, and I think connecting a lot of the things I'm talking about today, epistemic justice. The structure. In engaging with these challenges, I'll divide the presentation up into 4 themes. I've just tried to package the things that I feel are important to say around these 4 bullet points. The first one is what I call a recurring theme of disciplinary reflexivity in comparative and international education. Secondly, connecting to work on international surveys of student achievement, what's been labeled as the power of PISA, and the rise of the big data movement. And the third set of issues that I'll be raising connect to international agendas. There is an initiative called PISA for Development, so I'll connect briefly to that and to the concept of sustainability. The fourth and final section will pick up this concept of ways of knowing. And I'll be looking at different ways of knowing, implications for research positioning and for epistemic justice. First theme then, a recurring theme of disciplinary reflexivity. this seems to me to be really important to say at this time when so many quite passionate debates are out there in the literature. So what I'm trying to say is current challenges and tensions being faced by our field, by CIE, are generating critically important and very timely intellectual contributions. This is a cutting edge, it's critical stuff that really does need doing. But while much needs to be done, this is not the first time that many of these issues have been identified and interrogated within the field of comparative and international education. Might not be the case in terms of educational research itself in a broader way, or other fields perhaps, but I'm focusing upon comparative and international as a field. So disciplinary reflexivity is indeed a recurring field for us. And it's important to recognize how contemporary challenges and responses often build upon earlier phases of reimagining or reconceptualization. To give one example, and I could go way back, but there'd be too much to say. But if we go back to the millennium year of 2000, one benchmark when many fields, academic societies, peer-reviewed journals, took stock of their development while looking to the future. And that was in times of what was seen then as intensified globalization. You could look at two linked millennium special issues of the journal Comparative Education. Or we could look at the World Council of Comparative Education Societies Reflective Histories volume, published in 2007. Or in 2010, Marianne Larson published a volume of collected essays calling for fresh thinking in the field of comparative education. There's just a reminder of the two linked special issues of comparative education. The first one on the left-hand side was an editorial board member's statement, but the second was a contributions, reflections, responses from different people engaged in the field at that time worldwide. That's the cover for the World Council book, edited by Vandra Mason, Mark Bray and Maria Manzan. But anyone interested in looking at the different histories, the common interests, uncommon goals of different comparative and international societies worldwide could find that a useful resource to refer to. Here's a statement from the book by Marianne Larson. Comparative education researchers should engage in new and fresh thinking about what we study, the interpretive concepts, frameworks, theories, the influences and contexts that shape the work we do, the epistemic consequences of these broader changes for our field. My own work, if I look back at the turn of the century sort of times, 1999, 2000, 2003, with good friend Keith Watson, argued for a fundamental reconceptualization, that was the term I prefer to use, of comparative and international dimensions of our field, in ways that more effectively bridged what are seen by some as two different but related cultures and traditions in the combined field of comparative and international education. Now, at the heart of that were epistemological and methodological arguments, and they recognized the mutual benefits to be gained from a closer articulation between work on theory, policy, and practice within our field, and how such reconceptualization could help to challenge Northern epistemic dominance. And what I saw at that time as the pervasive influence of positivistic assumptions and the persistence of uncritical education policy transfer, often with the support of leading development agencies from the North to the global South. Now, from my own position, these were perspectives that were derived from personal interest, first of all, in the theoretical scholarship in comparative education, what some call the academic side of our combined field. But combined, this is the important point I'm making here, combined with in-depth engagement with the dilemmas of implementation, the actual practice of innovation in educational policy, in contexts then that included, well, the UK, Australia, but particularly formative for me in the context of Papua New Guinea. Anyone wants to know a little bit more about that background sort of contextual stuff, then this book that I published with Keith Watson in 2003 is perhaps a reference to have a look at. And the subtitle, which for me was really important, I think captures what we were trying to do at that time. It was Globalisation, Context and Difference, the sort of connections between. For present purposes, that's all I think I need to show at the moment, because the big point I'm trying to make is that while new depths of critical reflection are really, really important today, many constituencies involved in comparative education, comparative and international education, have faced repeated challenges and engaged in diverse forms of renewal and reinvention over recent decades. It's not something new that's only happening now. And that for me is important because some of those prior developments, including challenging post-colonial analyses, or we could go back, I'm just thinking of earlier speakers today, we could go back to the influence of Paulo Freire's work and go further back into dependency theory literature have been influential within the field of CIE. And they underpin and inform and inspire contemporary epistemological and methodological issues, challenges, and future directions that are the focus of the presentation now. So I'm now moving to my second theme, that sort of packaging together a number of thoughts and arguments around international surveys of student achievement, the power of PISA, and the rise of the big data movement. Much of my own early methodological work really was concerned with a challenge, adding to the challenge to the dominance of quantitative research in the field of education. It has also included challenges to the positivistic trends at that time in comparative studies as well. And more directly, more positively, I guess, with the legitimation of qualitative case study research for the field of comparative education. And it was work I did with another good friend, Graham Vullamy, in those years, as you can see on that slide, that you could have a look at if you wanted to find out what we were into then. If you look at the history of educational research in those 1970s, 80s, I guess we're talking English language world, but it does range beyond that. But much was achieved. And I think there were real sort of creative times, decades, when the diversification of educational and social science research cultures was quite dramatic. But if we look at the year 2000, the first year of the PISA studies, I would argue that again, globally, there was a resurgence of the prestige of quantitative surveys and statistical analysis in educational research. That sort of resurgence was well underway. My own analysis would say that that was rapidly followed by the arrival of new technologies, increased digitization, and the rise of, well, certainly I've used this phrase, the big data movement. For me, and for comparative education, comparative and international education, I would argue this represented a major epistemological and methodological challenge or re-challenge, new challenge with new implications for the rebalancing of paradigms and frameworks for analysis. for their relative influence, especially in terms of policy issues and influence and analysis, especially in terms of the availability and nature of funding that was available for different types of research, and for the potential to marginalize different types of university-based academics positioned as intellectual scholars or theorists. Important times. In no way, I might be repeating something I'm going to say later, but in no way am I trying to set up the paradigm wars that phrase was used way back in the past, to say that it's a case of either or, quantitative or qualitative or statistical or not. So I'm trying to move well beyond that. But what I am saying is that the powerful voices, the language of power, as Fetterman said way back in some time, is on the side of the more quantitative approaches to research that do carry prestige, power, and influence. It's the arguments I'm presenting are to try to keep a wide variety of methodological and epistemological approaches as valid and legitimate on the page, on the table. Going back to the challenge, Novoa and Yariv Marshall, very useful paper, very insightful paper. They were arguing in 2003, they were concerned that positivistic influences within comparative education were in danger of being used to legitimize policy positioning at the same time as they were threatening academic criticality. Other scholars, people many of us know, such as Alden Morris, argued at that time that it represented a new paradigm of comparative education, and its influential intermediate network of consultants backed up by large-scale quantitative evidence as prioritized by policymakers and funders. Seller and Lingard, some of their work is very helpful for people grappling with this set of issues. They saw and see the OECD's PISA initiative as a new global mode of governance in education, highlighting how the top performing countries in PISA league tables, such as Singapore and Hong Kong, were becoming the new reference societies that others felt compelled to copy. I was doing work at that time with one of my doctoral students based in Hong Kong, working for the British Council, Catherine Forestier. And her research and our work together showed how Hong Kong's strong PISA results coming top of those league tables stimulated efforts by the Secretary of State for Education in England to, and that's not my word, plunder selected Asian practice. To cite Michael Gove's own words, he said this: "I've been to Singapore and Hong Kong. And what is striking is that many of the lessons that apply there are lessons that we can apply here in England." He also said, "I want my children who are in primary school at the moment to have the sort of curriculum that children in other countries have, which are doing better than our own." So how do we make sense of these things, these statements? They're certainly examples that demonstrate the power of PISA. They do demonstrate the rise of new reference societies in the East, the top performers in the global league tables. And they demonstrate efforts of policymakers to emulate top performers. Or if we want to dig deeper, and that's not the point of this presentation, but in that English case, you can read some of the material that Catherine has published. It was seen as a way of at least legitimating what in England were controversial, formalistic, I haven't put the word there, but cheaper reform proposals. Catherine's work was also helpful, and it was ironic to see how, this is on the theoretical level, at the same time that England was looking at Hong Kong, looking for ways of borrowing, transferring, whatever words you find easier to use, formalistic modes of teaching and learning, that Hong Kong was doing the opposite. It was engaged in enough efforts to borrow elements of the English education system that would help them to become less didactic and more learner-centered. Times have changed since then. For present purposes, what I am saying here is, going back to the title of the session that I was invited to do, this adds further theoretical complexity to the existing conceptual and analytical frameworks that are in a very rich policy transfer literature in the field of comparative and international education. And this particular contribution demonstrates how policy borrowing, education policy borrowing, can be multidirectional, and not only that, can work both ways at the same time. The rise of the big data movement also generated a new area for critical policy transfer analysis. And I think this is one that deserves more attention, more careful attention. Much has been written promoting big data, and I'm not, again, trying to say that big data isn't great, it isn't useful, it can't be powerful, it can be all of those things. But many people have been actively promoting the benefits, the potential of big data. But there is less critical analysis of the implications, particularly in terms of our international world of international development and cooperation. And very few people, well, this is back in 2014, when I was first publishing a paper in comparative education in 2014 on this theme. Very few people were interrogating the power and dependency relations that the uncritical international transfer, not of policy and curriculum as such, but of big data findings, big data skills, big data technology, the problems that that could generate, especially in terms of transfer from the global north to the global south. In other words, we now have expensive, big science research modalities that command great prestige, power, influence, with a potential, good potential, okay, yeah, but also the potential to marginalize other, more context-sensitive forms of qualitative research. And I would say that also includes theoretical work, including post-colonial perspectives and also indigenous research methodologies, where I have much more to say later. Something very brief here on international agendas, PISA for development. The large-scale international surveys of student achievement can also be seen to be influencing international development agendas, goals, and targets. And the relatively new PISA for Development initiative is one area which I think should raise further concerns for comparative researchers, especially those that are challenging simplistic education policy transfer. PISA for Development that is trying to bring systems in the global south into the PISA network and to the PISA league tables, with all that that might imply for the positive and also for the problematic. What I'm trying to say here, though, is this has major epistemological and methodological implications for the international, uncritical international transfer of these high cost, and they are positivistic research paradigms and modalities. with all that that might mean for ongoing or future or different forms of research dependency and problems relating to epistemic justice. So I've put the next bullet point in bold. Maybe I'll let you read that rather than keep speaking to you. Timely imperatives. Yes, we must be more deeply reflexive as comparativists. At the same time, we must build upon early theoretical and conceptual contributions in advancing new intellectual frameworks, new critical histories, and post-colonial analyses that recognize the contemporary decolonial challenge and value a diversity of cultures and ways of knowing. And that's where I'm going in the final section of this part of the presentation, with the title of the final fourth theme, Ways of Knowing, Research Positioning and Epistemic Justice. In 1990, a comparative paper by Van der Meesman was titled Ways of Knowing, so I felt it just useful to put that back on the table. But it does demonstrate how comparative and international education has long grappled, I'm saying well before that as well, but long grappled with diversity in research and notions of epistemic justice. But it still is true that today these are very key, fundamental, conceptual and methodological issues that underpin the contemporary decolonization challenge. And they are issues that require ever deeper levels of critical reflexivity. Let me just look back at the University of Bristol in recent decades, right up to now. Within recent years, many of my colleagues working with researchers in the Global South have centered on methodological issues relating to North-South partnerships, research positioning, Southern theory, epistemic justice, drawing on work of scholars as I've listed there, such as Lumba, Connell, DeSantos, and others. There are many more. One example, and I believe my friend and colleague Laura Arthur might be in the audience at the moment, with the support of BASE funding, the British Association for International and Comparative Education, we managed to pull together early career researchers and doctoral researchers to revisit the changing nature of insider-outsider positionings in ways that open up new liminal, the third space, different ways, research spaces, and non-binary. Again, I'm working hard here to try to dispel binary ways of thinking, but binary methodological frameworks for others carrying out in-depth fieldwork as independent researchers or in collaboration or co-construction with others. Another reference that I hope would be helpful for others, and many comparativists do find themselves working as insiders or outsiders, or what our book is really trying to say is you often find you're a bit of all of these, and it's changing over time in our rapidly interconnected world. More recently, a series of 3 online webinars have been convened by the Centre for Comparative and International Research in Education in Bristol, in collaboration with UNESCO, on the theme of decolonizing education for sustainable futures. This was Leon Tickley's, Professor Leon Tickley's UNESCO Chair Seminar Series that pulled together the 3 events, which itself has led to the publication of a report that I'll mention in a second. The global initiative established by UNESCO in 2019 is trying to reimagine how knowledge and learning can shape the future of humanity and the planet into the future. And I would say, yep, it's very timely for those calling for a more inclusive and culturally diverse development frameworks. This sort of thinking connects well with the lecture that we've previously had by Professor Rolf Constance earlier this evening. Here's a statement that's a quote taken from the report, the synthesis report from those 3 webinars, which is now available online through the UNESCO Chair website or the University of Bristol website. Certainly it's presenting a major challenge here, major challenges and challenges for UNESCO, given that this is a product of a collaborative event. Much of the knowledge, values and skills expected to be learned in formal education systems have been Eurocentric in nature. I'll let you read on. Calling for education to be decolonized and for diverse knowledge systems to be the basis for realizing equitable and sustainable futures. Beyond that, advancing decolonization analyses, I would argue that, and more robust work also needs to be done to extend and apply decolonial analyses in ways that do the following: avoid the emergence of new dualistic tendencies that are historically nuanced and rigorous, perhaps deeper in critical reflexivity, do more to explore differences within and across the CIE research constituencies worldwide, and that are more truly global in nature and scope. And it's that last phrase that leads me into my concluding set of arguments, where I want to highlight exciting work being carried out within what UNESCO classify as small island developing states. My own experience at the University of Papua New Guinea throughout the 1980s sort of was formative in many ways, and it led to the development, when I moved to Bristol, of the Specialist Education in Small States Research Group, and to ongoing work with colleagues and friends in small island developing states worldwide, including as adjunct professor at the University of the South Pacific. The global network was established in 1994. We've now well over 100 members worldwide, including from all 3 major groupings of small states in the Pacific, the Indian Ocean and the Caribbean. And the website referenced there, if anybody wants to find out more about the work we're doing together. I know some of our colleagues from Oceania, from the Pacific, are with us today, so hello to them. And really this section is inspired by my work with and those good friends. Tongan writer and anthropologist Epeli Hauofa, who categorizes Pacific islands, you can see the decolonial stuff coming in immediately, as large ocean states, or as Oceania's Sea of Islands, made seminal contributions to decolonization literature some decades ago. And others working in this tradition have long challenged the dominance of Western development discourses and epistemologies and their influence upon education in the Pacific. Konai Helu Taman, Tongan poet and professor of education at the University of the South Pacific, her work captured this very early on and has inspired other generations. And while this literature is little known beyond the region, I'm arguing here that it has much to offer the international community. And it's inspired new generations of Pacific researchers to ground their work in traditions from their own contexts, exhibiting deep respect for oceanic cultures, values, and, quote, relational space. Franciscoia Vaca-Auta and Rosiana Lager, 2 names there. For me, this is important scholarship for the wider international comparative community, and especially for those engaging with decolonial issues and their implications across the social sciences and humanities. Another colleague in the Pacific, Ula, who's the director of the USP, University of the South Pacific Institute of Education based in Tonga, argues that she's talking particularly to the international comparative and international community. The current conversation, is it just for outsiders? If the voice of insiders are included more strongly in conversations about comparative and international education research, what would this do for research approaches, for methodology, for knowledge generated? Important. To bring things in focus with, the big challenges of our whole globe, something that shows that we are all interconnected, to do with environmental uncertainty and climate change. Rosianna Lagi, her work has been looking at environmental uncertainty and work on indigenous knowledge and local understandings of climate change in the Pacific. This offers a lot of potential for realistic insights and policy learning for a wider international community, and theoretical learning for a wider international community, from and for other small island developing states living at the sharp end. And this is something we've been working around with colleagues here in Bristol and in small states in our Education in Small States research group for many years, living at the sharp end of environmental uncertainty. And that's Rosie, who is at the University of the South Pacific School of Education. So, small island developing states are some of the most vulnerable contexts experiencing the impact of sea level rise in the world, with, for example, Tuvalu in the Pacific and the Maldives in the Indian Ocean facing national inundation with a rise of just 1 meter in sea level, perhaps the height of the desk I'm sitting at now. But SIDS are also notably resilient. They've achieved a great deal, and their experience is invaluable for the international community. So this points to what I believe is significant and timely potential for comparative studies of the educational implications of climate change, to learn from indigenous knowledge and from locally grounded perspectives through detailed, homegrown, qualitative research. I'm getting towards my conclusion, and I think it's exactly on time, but I'd like to leave the last word on SIDS, rather than it being from me, to Dame Paulette Louisi, former Governor General of St. Lucia, 1997 to 2018, 20 years as head of state, longest serving female head of state in the Commonwealth, I believe. And she was also a founder member of our Education in Small States research group. At a speech carried out in Laborie, which is where she was born, in a little village in St. Lucia in the Caribbean, she said, if culture shapes what we mean by development, we need to have a firm understanding of the way of life by which we want to be defined. We, it's her voice, need to agree on the social order that we need to construct and share with each other. This for me is very resonant of many of the arguments presented by my Pacific colleagues and friends. We need to take up the challenge of reclaiming our own voices, of finding out who we are, the challenge of adapting these voices to present day realities, the challenge of nurturing the cultural ethos that will infuse our sustainable development agenda. Paulette is connecting and keen for her nation and Caribbean states to connect with the international community in terms of international development processes and so on. But she's saying more on their terms, through their eyes, in tune with their values, aspirations, etc. So I think I'm concluding my presentation bit of the session. I think I've one or two more slides. Now there's one slide here, when I did say I would try to just point to some new issues that I really think need further renewed attention, particularly relating to publication, access, epistemic justice in our field and beyond our field. And maybe our field can be instructive to other fields. Maybe we should be at the head of the curve. Critical issues concerning the internationalization of academic publishing connects to what we've just been saying. This relates to the importance of new directions, frameworks, and platforms to provide greater support for researchers, perspectives, and publications located in and from the Global South, to contribute to the international discourse, further internationalizing higher education and the related academic literature. Raphael Mitchell's work with his colleagues here in Bristol and around the globe, particularly valuable. Do have a look at some of that work. We're trying with Bristol University Press as well to make some contributions in this way. There's a hot link there for anybody that could follow it if this is made available, to our new book series in the Bristol Studies called Bristol Studies in Comparative and International Education, where we're trying to do many of the things in the paragraph above. However, global citation data, league tables, and digital systems certainly reinforce the position, status, and profits of large international publishing houses, often at the expense of epistemic justice, affordable access, and the emergence of more locally produced arguments, journals, and books. How our field can deal with such imbalances in more contextually sensitive and ethical ways remains a further priority for attention. Quick conclusions. First paragraph, reiterating the challenges that I began this session with. The uncertainties generated by climate change in what we hope will be a post-COVID, let's hope it is, world. Presentations focused on related theoretical, epistemological, and methodological issues. Yeah, importantly, arguing that while some of these challenges are new and generated by our rapidly changing and digitized world, it's important to recognize how others represent further iterations and intensifications of concerns and responses that informed earlier phases of critical reflection within our field. So my conclusions, maybe for the roundtable debate, sort of ideas, thoughts. I'm calling for CIE to pursue increased self-reflexivity from a diversity of cultural, epistemological, and methodological positions, while challenging uncritical paradigmatic and policy transfer, and engaging with fundamental tensions. This is an important phrase, in less dualistic ways, more historically nuanced ways, more ethically diverse and contextually sensitive ways. I think that should be on time. Thank you to everybody who may be there. I hope this is helpful. And I thank everyone and look forward to our roundtable discussion.